The F80A5 Shooting Star, originally the P80A5, was the first ever American jet fighter to enter service with the then Army Air Force. In War Thunder, it fills a similar role, being one of the first jets available in the American tech tree. It may even be some people's introduction to jet combat. So let's dive in and see what this plane is capable of. In spring 1943, Allied intelligence caught wind of the German Me-262 prototypes performing flight testing. This prompted the Army Air Force to come up with a counter to this new fighter, but their own jet development program was far behind that of the Germans and British. Thankfully, the British would agree to send over their own research data as well as the Halford H-1B Goblin jet engine for the Americans to use. The task of developing the new plane was handed to the legendary designer Clarence Kelly Johnson and his skunkworks team at Lockheed. Design work on the P-80 would begin in May 1943 and finished up in mid-June. Since the new fighter was needed as soon as possible, they were given a 150-day deadline to build a prototype that would be ready for flight testing. The Skunkworks team began work on June 26, 1943, and 143 days later, on November 16, 1943, they had a brand new prototype. However, the first flight would be delayed after the engine was destroyed by foreign object damage during the first run-up when the skin of the inlet ducts was sucked in. There were only two of these engines in existence at the time, and the other one was in the Vampire prototype in England. So the Skunkworks team had to wait for the engine to be dismounted and then shipped to them. The XP-80 would make its maiden flight on January 8, 1944, with Milo Burkham at the controls. Milo praised the plane as being a joy to fly. During testing, the plane managed to reach a speed of 502 miles per hour in level flight, the first plane to ever exceed 500 miles per hour. However, it was decided back in September of 1943 that the production version would use a General Electric I-40 jet engine, originally known as the Allison J-33, so two further prototypes were built. These two planes were given the designation XP-80A to denote the engine change. Pilots were not fond of these two new prototypes as they were larger and heavier by as much as 25% compared to the original design. These two prototypes were both lost in crashes during flight testing, killing pilot Milo Burkham and severely injuring another pilot, Tony Levier. Development would still continue and 13 pre-production YP-80As were ordered. However, that was not the end of fatalities, as World War II ace Richard Bong was killed in a crash during an acceptance flight of one of these YP-80As. The Army Air Force wanted to prove that these planes were safe, so 5 of the YP-80As had 500 hours of flight time put on each of them without any further incident. After this, production of the P-80 would begin in February 1945 when an order was placed for 344 planes. While the P-80 didn't see combat during World War II, 4 of the pre-production variants were sent to Europe in early 1945. 2 were sent to England, and the other 2 were sent to Italy. The planes based in Italy did fly several sorties, but no combat occurred during these. Once the war ended, the initial plan for 5,000 planes was reduced to 2,000 planes. When production ended in 1950, 1,714 planes of several variants had been produced. The plane would be redesignated from P-80 to F-80 following the Air Force becoming its own branch. When the Korean War began, the F-80 would serve in both air-to-air and air-to-ground roles. Several air victories had been claimed over North Korean Yak-9s and IL-10s early on by F-80 pilots. As the war progressed, the F-80 would take part in some of the first jet versus jet dogfights. While the MiG-15 claimed first blood against the F-80, the F-80 would down a MiG-15 shortly after. However, the F-80 was very much outclassed by the MiG-15, and once F-86 Sabres began arriving in Korea, the F-80s would only be used in air-to-ground roles. By the end of the war, the F-80 was only flying photo recon missions. After the war, the F-80 was replaced by newer jets, but would go on to serve in other nations until the 1970s. Since there are no avionics we need to look at, let's go ahead and move on to the air-to-ground ordnance. The F80A5 has 2 options in this regard. The first is a pair of 1,000-pound dumb bombs, and the second is 8 HFAR unguided rockets. Where you only need to land the bombs close to a tank to get a kill, you will need to have a direct hit with an HFAR to kill one. One of the nice things about the rockets, though, is that they do fire individually and not in pairs. The F80 isn't the best cast option for this BR, but it's not the worst. Your only air-to-air option is your 6 M2 Browning 50 caliber machine guns located in the nose. Each gun has access to 300 rounds for a total of 1800 rounds across all guns. With a fire rate of 750 rounds per minute, you'll have a trigger time of 12.5 seconds. While aiming these guns isn't too difficult thanks to their high velocity, they don't do that much damage. Unless you start a fire or get a pilot snipe, you will have to put several hundred rounds on target to put a plane down. I suggest using either the universal or tracer belts for the best performance. I personally didn't find the stock grind that difficult, but for someone who is new to jets, it may be challenging as you adjust to the gameplay. You only need a handful of kills for each modification. If you're having difficulty killing players, just go after the AI attackers or the soft ground units to get your first couple of modifications. Your first priorities should be the compressor, booster, engine, and G-suit, followed by the rest of the performance mods. After that, you can get the gun mods and then the ground ordnance mods. The F80A5 is powered by a single Allison J33A17 jet engine capable of producing 1,650 kilograms of force. This can push the F80 up to a top speed of 475 knots, which is above average for the BR. The low-end acceleration is pretty good for a jet, but after around 250 knots, that acceleration will start to slow down. One thing to keep in mind about early jet engines is that the engine will lag behind your control inputs, meaning when you lower the throttle, it'll take the engine a couple seconds to throttle down, and when you throttle up, the reverse happens. The controls will start to compress around 420 knots, and the wings will rip at around Mach 0.83 or 530 knots on the deck. The energy retention of the F80 is very good. Other performance factors like turn rate, roll rate, and climb rate are all good for the BR. The Shooting Star may not be the best in any of these categories, but it is a solid, well-rounded jet performance-wise. One nice thing the F80 gets that other starter jets don't is an air brake. It can come in handy when you need to drop some speed in a dogfight or when slowing down for landing. As you enter jet gameplay, you will need to adjust how you play. Planes are going to start seeing large jumps in speed, which will force you to expand your situational awareness as planes are able to cover a larger distance faster. Because speeds have picked up, your turning circle is now much larger compared to props. You will have less time to make decisions as fights speed up and positioning becomes more important. With some of that in mind, I'll walk you through how I play the F80A5. After taking off, I'll aim for one of the outer bomb points and climb at 10 degrees until I'm around 10,000 feet. This will put me slightly off to the side so I'm not immediately jumped, and will give me some energy stored up for later. I want to deal with anyone up at altitude with me first. If it's a prop, I'll try to energy trap them, and if it's a jet, a mix of dogfighting and energy trapping usually works. Once you have the high ground secured, you want to go after enemies below you that are threatening your teammates. Like American props, you want to use energy fighting tactics for as long as you're able to. Once you transition into normal dogfighting, try not to let your speed drop below 200 knots. If you need a little bit of extra turning, you can drop your flaps below 260 knots. When flying the F80A5, my primary targets early on will be Su-11s and MiG-9s. These are very fast planes with high energy retentions, so if you let them get above you, they can be a real pain to deal with. Your best bet for killing these planes is to work with teammates to bleed them of their energy. If you're alone, having an altitude advantage over them is preferred. If they are above you, you're in for a real tough fight. Your focus should be to keep your speed up as you dodge and try not to lose all of your altitude. Bide your time and wait for them to make a mistake that you can capitalize on, and if you can, work your way towards your teammates. In down tiers, the Ju-288 or the first Arado are fairly easy targets for you to go after. You're faster than both of them, making them easy targets for you to catch up to. And if you stick to boom and zoom passes from odd angles, the gunners on the Ju will have a hard time hitting you. Against other early German jets like the Me-262 and HO-229, you hold an energy and speed advantage over them, so energy trapping them is very effective. Unlocking the F80A5 will require 95,000 RP and will set you back 270,000 SL to buy it and 78,000 SL to train the crew. If you want to expert the crew, it will require a further 270,000 SL. The modifications aren't that hard to get, ranging from 5.5k RP to 9k RP. In total, you will need 82.8 KRP and 134.7 KSL to spade the Shooting Star. The repair cost is definitely on the high side, being 16,000 and some change SL. It does get an RP modifier of 1.9, which is average, while its SL modifier of 2.9 is below average. The default skin on the Shooting Star isn't anything special, but it does have a few marketplace skins. Personally, I'm not a fan of either of these, so I stick with the default. The cockpit of the Shooting Star is a real mixed bag for me. While you have excellent visibility thanks to the bubble canopy, I'm not a big fan of the instrument layout. Your speedometer, altimeter, and rate of climb indicator are all on the bottom row, requiring you to look down to read them. This could cause you to lose track of your target during a dogfight if you need to check your speed. Overall, it's a decent cockpit that I wouldn't mind flying in. Alright, let's wrap things up with the pros and cons before ending with my final verdict. Starting off with the pros, the high top speed and good energy retention compared to other early jets will give you an edge over them. For those planes you can't keep up with in terms of speed, you can keep up with them in a turn fight. Having an air brake is a huge plus for an early jet. It can help force an overshoot or keep you from overshooting an opponent. Just be sure to use it sparingly, otherwise you'll end up stalling out. Moving over to the cons, the high repair cost will definitely put some people off, and that's perfectly reasonable. The 50 cal is really starting to show its age at this point. Unless you manage to start a fire, these rounds don't do enough damage to quickly put down a jet. This can lead to a lot of assists as you just aren't able to finish off a target. This isn't unique to the F80, but early jet engines aren't able to adjust to fast throttle movements like props can, so it'll take some time to get used to. While the F80A5 is expensive to repair, it's a solid plane to transition into jets with. The guns will be familiar, so you'll only need to slightly adjust your aim for the higher speeds. Like American props, it excels in a boom and zoom playstyle. Flight performance wise, you don't really have any glaring weaknesses. Overall, I enjoyed coming back to play this plane. As always, thanks for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.